Welcome to Building Innovation, Integrating Serious Lego Play with Design Thinking. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Fernanda Correa. I'm Business Development at Spring to Innovation, and I'll be helping out with the webinar today. We hope you get a lot of value out of this session and enjoy the content, whether you're watching this live or on demand. In today's webinar about building innovation, integrating serious Lego play with design thinking, we hope you get insights into fostering team collaboration and communication through human-centered design principles and interactive playful methodologies. And we're privileged to have a special guest speaker, Chrystia Chudczak, who is the founder and CEO of DECIDIUM, a global design studio based in Ottawa and a Lego serious play designer and facilitator. She's inspired by the power of design to change the human experience for good. The former Chief Design Officer at the University of Ottawa, she pioneered this role at a Canadian university. Chrystia was the Executive Director of the Innovation Lab at Innovation Science and Economic Development, bringing human-centered design to the Government of Canada. Working with over 100 federal agencies, companies, nonprofits, academia, and organizations across Canada and globally, she activated design thinking and experimentation to reimagine how public policy and decision-making is done. Chrystia was instrumental in relocating the Innovation Lab into Bayview Yards in Ottawa, the first Government of Canada human-centered design lab embedded in a regional incubator and accelerator. And we'll also hear some insights from Nilüfer Erdoğan, founder and CEO of Spring to Innovation. She's a TEDx Ottawa speaker, author of the international best-selling book, Future-Proofing by Design, and has dedicated her career to assisting organizations in achieving remarkable advancements through design thinking principles. So with that, I'll pass it over to Nilüfer to begin today's discussion with Chrystia.
Thank you so much, Fernanda, and thank you everyone for coming today. We have a very fascinating webinar lined up with Chrystia, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to work with Chrystia in the past, and she's always very creative in different mediums, and so I'm really excited about this talk. Before we get started, I want to ask you guys a couple of questions and also do a little bit of presentation quickly, a minute or two around what design thinking is. For those that are on the call, if you wouldn't mind letting us know what your level of familiarity with design thinking or human-centered design is, from not a clue to I've heard it, I've tried it, or parts of it, I use it all the time, or I'm an expert. Would you guys mind letting us know which area that you guys are falling into? Oh, there's some experts, tried it, parts of it, heard of it. And inclusive design, heard of it? Okay, lots of heard of it. I use it all the time. Fantastic. Okay, and there's folks that teach design at universities. I love it. So all over the place. Awesome. Thank you. Next slide. And it's nice because I get to see some familiar names in the chat as well too. And to folks that are just tuning in for the first time into our webinars, welcome. So when I look at design thinking and human-centered design, I think of it as better understanding the people that we're trying to create an impact for. And when I think of design thinking, the traditional way of looking at design thinking, it has the 5 phases. So starting out with empathizing, understanding who our end clients are. And then once we better understand our end clients through tools like personas, journey maps, and empathy maps, we're better able to define what the problem is that we're trying to solve and then come up with ideas, prototype, and test. With Spring to Innovation, as we've worked with more clients, we actually pull back, and even before we start to empathize, we actually think about what is that initial problem that the organization is trying to solve, what is their mandate, and having everybody be able to articulate it in a simple 1 or 2 lines and agree on what that challenge is before identifying what success is going to look like for the group, and then going into empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and testing. Like Fernanda said, we have a lot of material on our YouTube channel if you want to find out more. And if you have questions around design thinking or human-centered design, happy to answer it at the end. But I am super excited today to have Chrystia on board to talk to us about serious play and design thinking and the integration of them. So as we get started, let's wake up the room. And I'm going to hand it over to Chrystia to wake up the room and talk a little bit about what is serious play and how do we integrate it with design thinking. Chrystia, do you want to maybe wake up the room and tell us a little bit more about serious play and how we integrate it with design thinking?
Great. Hi, Neil. Thanks for having me. Hopefully everybody can see me and hear what I'm doing. My name is Chrystia, and I run a small global studio here in Ottawa. And one of the tools and techniques that I use is Lego Serious Play. And the way we start when I do my work with clients is we wake up the room with this. So we need to wake up the room. We wake up the room, we wake up the Lego bits, we wake up the minifigures, and we start our conversation on, how do we help you solve a problem using this really fun, creative tool called Lego Serious Play. So with that, what is Lego Serious Play? Can everyone see this?
Yeah.
See my little model. Lego Serious Play is both a methodology and a process. And it's a way to creatively solve problems with organizations in the public, private, nonprofit sector, corporate sector. And it's a way that allows people to imagine and reimagine ideas and insights, and to share and gather insights on a specific problem. I'm holding this to show you essentially what the process is about Lego Serious Play. Essentially, what happens in an environment is I ask a set of questions in a sequenced order, which requires people to build models of their responses to these questions. And this is done in a way where it's very much model-driven, model-centric, and metaphor-centric. So this model is essentially a metaphor for a question that I would have asked in a particular design session. And you can see it's kind of weird, right? I just built this a few minutes ago, and I wanted to show you a physical representation of what a model would look like and how we would then proceed to gather insights from the model itself. Now, in this case, what would happen would be I would ask Neil a question. I'd say, "Hey, Neil, can you respond to the following question as part of a team? Build me a model, build a model that describes your current work situation." Okay, so here's Neil's current work situation. So she's built this model, and she's got very specific ideas in terms of how she selected the bricks and what the bricks look like and mean to her, what the colorations are, how she stacked the bricks. The fact that she's actually got a minifigure here without a head speaks to me and says something. And the question becomes, well, how do you pull the insights out of the models to better understand what people are thinking? And this is a really clever approach to the methodology that was developed here, because what it does is it requires you to talk through the model. So Lego Serious Play in a group environment enables people to be very creative and non-judgmental. And that's a really important part of creating a safe space for an environment to problem solve, especially super complex issues. So in this case, Neil's built her current work environment. And Neil obviously has an idea of what this is about. So I'm going to try and interpret what Neil has done here to describe to you how we actually pull out the insights. So if I was Neil, I would say the following. Well, my work environment through the model is very staggered. I'm all over the place. I'm in different parts of the world. Here, this is me. This little minifigure right here with a head is me. And I'm trying to work very diligently and keep everything together. However, on occasion, I feel very disgruntled and distracted. And so I often forget by not thinking about what I'm doing in terms of managing my work environment. So this person here, this little minifigure without a head, represents me on those days where I can't control my environment. And however, I've selected this panel on the bottom, which roots me into my strategy of managing my business. And so, yes, I know what I'm doing, but there are these occasions where I'm really stressed in terms of where I'm going. So the model itself becomes a metaphor for Nil's idea of the typical work environment. And what happens is we design an experience, a problem-solving experience, using this tool and technique, and build successive models that become much more complex, much more integrative, builds that also include other people, so you're building as a team. And that's where it becomes really, really fascinating to see how people collaborate and cooperate in terms of building out solutions for for these particular questions and problems that they're tackling. So in a nutshell, Lego Serious Play is essentially that. But what I do is I take that process and methodology and I flip it on its ear.
And what's really fascinating is that you're getting at some unarticulated needs that it's harder to do in words and in framing. But some of like with a Lego model that you just showcased, that person without the head is saying so much without actually writing it down and getting at some of those unarticulated needs. And so as you're describing that, for me, I see a lot of empathy in there. How do you think that serious play and design thinking integrate well together?
Well, I think Lego Serious Play is a tool of human-centered design. So you can draw through by using this particular methodology in each step of design thinking and human-centered design. From the research component, you can design a problem-solving experience where you use Lego Serious Play to actually articulate research issues and insights, particularly in groups that are very mixed and diverse. I find that using this particular tool within an environment that allows you to really mix people who are looking at a particular complex problem, who are very much supportive of a specific solution where others are not. So you have this diametrically opposed sort of viewpoints. What LSP does is it neutralizes those sort of highs and lows and brings them out through the models. So you're not judging a person's perspective or experience. You're actually questioning what's in the model to better understand where they're coming from. And I think at the end of the day, as you go through the design process, up until prototyping, you really become more adept as a team and as an organization at being able to solve your own problem a lot better.
Yeah, I love that. And I've seen it used in challenges that involve multiple organizations, and people have said that it's really hard to get upset at Lego figures. Whereas when you're actually talking to people, conversations can get a lot more heated. But when you're looking at Lego figures, I think it does diffuse some of the negative emotions that might arise as well too, as you're handling very complex and passionate issues as well.
Yeah, I mean, once you get over the hook, what's the word I'm looking for? Being scared of actually looking and touching the Lego as an adult. I think most people, when they first come across this particular tool, they're very skeptical because, what is a little toy going to do for me as an adult to solve my big world complex problems? Well, it's pretty amazing what it can do. And once you suspend disbelief after the first icebreaker, typically in my sort of environments, people just get into it. And the key for LSP is flow, like any creative process. So if you're able to access flow in a group fairly rapidly, then it's incredible what they can come up with in terms of solving their own situations.
Yeah, I love that. And so you've already talked about a number of the main outcomes and benefits achieved through this approach. Anything else that we might have left out?
Yeah, it's fast. And in a world that demands action quickly, oftentimes not really thinking about what you're doing. With a well-structured LSP approach, a clear question, and a willing group of players, essentially, you can get at some real hard issues very, very quickly. The big question becomes, and we've talked about this, is you can get to a prototype of a solution, but it's actually taking that solution and executing it. And LSP is actually really good as well as in terms of a methodology for developing execution plans. So you can use LSP and other design tools like empathy mapping and combining them with LSP and coming up with a solution and then designing out what could that execution plan look like, that implementation plan.
Yeah, I love that. And we have, I'm not trained like you are, but we have used Lego for prototyping and testing some solutions. And you hit it right on. It was so fast and yet so well done and inexpensive way to showcase and demonstrate models and concepts in a way that would have taken a lot longer and cost a lot more too. And so it's phenomenal for that.
Yeah, I agree totally.
Yeah, and in your experience, how do you think series play enhances creativity and collaboration? I know you touched a little bit more on collaboration, but in team settings compared to some of the more traditional ways.
Well, as I mentioned before, I think that if you can establish a safe environment, a psychologically safe space, we used to call it in the lab, environment that allows people to really shed their preconceived notions, either in terms of hierarchy or what they represent in the corporate space or in the government space, and just come with an open mind. It's incredible how quickly you can achieve certain milestones in the method, but also how quickly you can get into the flow. And for LSP, that's a huge piece of its success. If you're able to get into that individual flow in terms of building your model, or a team flow in building a concentrated model, that's where the neurons are, like, hand coordination happens. I mean, I was told at one point 80% of your brain cells in your head are linked to your hands. So if you imagine so it's called tactile play. So if you're playing, creating models, and you're thinking while you're doing this, then you can solve anything essentially, and tackle anything, especially really tough circumstances in some of the specific projects that I've worked on in the last number of years.
Yeah, and you hit the tactile component of it, something that's tangible that people can see and experience is huge. You and I have chatted a lot about some of your experiences, and I've had a chance to see you in action as well too. Could you maybe talk a little bit about your experiences with Serious Play, like with Indigenous Highway 16, University of Ottawa alumni, and the Ukraine business as well too?
Sure. So the first one that you mentioned, the first project, was done in 2019, and with a colleague of mine, Dr. Connie Delisle, and we went to northern BC, and basically Highway 16 is a notorious highway in Canada for missing Indigenous women over the last 45 years. It's a horrible sort of story of Indigenous peoples in Canada. And what we wanted to do was we wanted to go into the community in Vanderbilt, BC, and actually sit down with Lego and some Canadian technology that was in play at that time called Nareva, sort of this collaborative software, and actually build out what a safe experience could look like. And that's what we ended up doing. If you go on my website, there's a section there that talks about that and actually shows you very visually with photographs what that looked like. And so a small group of Indigenous people, along with the RCMP and a couple of community members, actually did that. And what came out of there, we did two things. We did that with adults, and then we were in a community center, and down the hallway there was a daycare. So there was kids like 6 to 8, 9, about 9 of them in this daycare. And so when they saw us playing with Lego in the big room, they wanted to do the same thing. So I took my lunch hour and we went and did that with them. And the question was essentially the same question, because they live along that highway. They understand what a highway looks like. And we just asked them, how would you make that highway safe? And they build out models, and it was very practical. Put a stop sign at the door, like at the intersection. Put red lights there. How about a phone that people can use along the highway? So very simple things, but it came out through their models. And so that was a really interesting experience because of the level of trauma involved with that some of these individuals had experienced in their lifetime in their Indigenous communities. And so understanding how to design through trauma, and how to adjust the human-centered design to do that through Lego Serious Play in this case, but in general, is really, really important. The second one was U of O alumni. That was really different. So University of Ottawa, when I was there, the alumni team was having a hard time attracting alumni to Alumni Week in October. And for them, that's quite a large money-making sort of opportunity, as well as reconnecting people. So they were pretty adventurous, and they said, okay, well, we're going to use Lego Serious Play. and we're going to design out a new alumni experience. And so we did that. We did that over 2 days, and we did it in 2 parts, 3 parts actually. The main part was the main day. We had about 90 people building out different experience parts. And Ottawa U is a bilingual university, so there's a really unique dimension culturally between Francophones and Anglophones. So that was built, that came through the actual Lego models. And then we did an evening session where it was not Lego driven, but we had conversations. We used human-centered design with alumni outside of Canada. So we had people from Silicon Valley and Hong Kong and others all over the world, and they were giving us their insights. And then we took all of that the next day with a smaller test group of 2 teams of 10 people each, if I recall, 1 Anglophone group and 1 Francophone group, and they spent the morning building out the action plan. So that was really interesting, because what came out of the main sessions, there was pretty good stuff. But when you put that sort of those insights in the hands of 2 separate teams with 2 very distinct cultural approaches, how you execute becomes very different. And the university ended up merging the 2 of the best stuff. They switched the dates. They basically did virtually everything that came out of that session in the next alumni thing. So we did that in the spring, I think it was, and they implemented in the fall, in October.
I love that, because again, you touch on how you're going from ideas, getting in unarticulated needs, and then creating solutions really rapidly too, and then implementing it.
Yeah, it was like rapid prototyping of the implementation strategy. So that was really interesting for me to see, especially the bicultural kind of environment, and also the age-wise, because we had alumni who were in their 80s, and then we had students. So we were really mixed the group of people in the room. And that was a lot of fun. I think people learned a lot about each other and sort of how they see the world and the university itself. And then just quickly, the third one I did last November in Toronto. So this was on the margins of the Canada-Ukraine Rebuild Ukraine conference in Toronto, organized by the Canadian-Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce. So what we did, we took advantage of the conference, and we brought 12 people from Ukraine. And you have to understand, it's very difficult for people to leave Ukraine under these circumstances of war, especially men. But they were able through the conference to bring, so we had 12 people that were representing different parts of the social environment, from the military to humanitarian groups to businesses, etc. We had 12 people from Canada. We were in this small innovation lab in downtown Toronto, and basically I had 7 hours to work with them. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to reimagine the Canada-Ukraine business ecosystem. So we have an ecosystem supported by chambers of commerce, etc., but nothing really strategically coherent and cohesive. And it was felt that at a time of war, especially in a time of war, now's the time to start really thinking about what does post-victory look like? And in this case, what does the economic relationships look like? And that we did this at the very simultaneously that the Canadian government was passing the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement. So it was going through Parliament. So it ended up that these teams of 5 people at each table built out what they thought their ideal ecosystem would look like. And that included very things that we would not think of in Canada. Things like, for example, veterans, the ability to integrate veterans in innovation development and innovation startups, the whole reimagining the whole sort of military complex, but in a humanitarian way, if I can say it that way. So again, it's on my website. It was very interesting. And I thought, for a community and individuals who are traumatized by war, ongoing war, that this kind of experience might not necessarily reap the kinds of benefits in a safe environment, but it was actually the opposite. It reaped tremendous benefits in that safe environment. And they were able to come up with a deck, basically with 15 talking points within 8 hours to present at the conference of what their needs would be to build this ecosystem. So it was really difficult. It was hard because it's something very close to my heart, but it was necessary. And I think it proves that something, simple like a brick, and a headless minifigure can actually reap tremendous rewards in terms of flow and solution making.
Yeah, and you mentioned it earlier, people need to be able to create psychological safety zones, but it also sounds like the series play also allows for more likelihood of creating that psychological safety zone and opportunities to be more creative and collaborative as well too.
Yeah, it's funny. Your toys make a difference, right? Some adults love cars as toys, kids love Lego, but Lego and certain kinds of games are actually quite powerful. I use also Rory's story cubes, for example, is one of my other tools. I have a bunch of them, but tools in terms of how to extract sort of insights from people that are typically hard-nosed or don't want to play. They don't want to participate because they don't see the value. But getting them through that first hump, that first step, and getting them into the process. And usually it takes a few people around them who are enthusiastic, who are willing to make a fool of themselves, if that's the way it's been described to me, that kind of unlocks something in that person's head. And once they start to see the value of what's being offered, the insights and the complexity of the insights and the honesty of the insights, frankly, it becomes very magical.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, thank you for mentioning Rory's story cubes as well too. Can you talk a little bit more actually about other types of play that you've brought into organizations? Because I remember when you and I were working at the ISED Innovation Lab as well too, you actually created some games in there and incorporated play quite a bit outside of Lego as well.
Yeah, when we were in the lab, we had a number of very talented individuals who, like yourself, Neil, and others, who were either situated in the lab. We had a very tiny team, but situated in the lab, or we asked people to come in as contractors to help us out. And one of the things that we did was we created through our team a game that's called I forget now. You may have just forgot it. It was on the tip of my tongue. May I help? I think it was May I help. And it was a card game designed by one of our team, actually, and with contributions by others, that would help unlock conversations with public servants, between public servants, about mental health. And in 2016, 2017, that was pretty groundbreaking. It was an actual practical application of creation and application of a tool that could be immediately used in the environment. It was low cost, low fidelity prototyping up until the final version of the printout. And it came complete with the designers designed the prototype of the physical game. They also designed the entire teaching program and training program around that. So we didn't just allow the game to go into the hands of anybody in the public service. We made sure that they were, train the trainers process so that we were very well prepared when the game went out. The game actually won an award. I think it was a deputy minister's commendation for the group that was part of the group that created it. And and it went on to live, I guess, in a number of different departments as well. So that was one of the tangible things that came out of our lab that we could point to say, yeah, a human-centered process solving specific problems actually can work, and it can work really well, provided that there's a support and the sort of the leadership and support around the process and around the people doing it. And often that's very hard in institutions and organizations when it comes down to this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and you said a couple of things that are phenomenal in there too. And I had the experience of seeing people play that game, and the educational component of it that was integrated, I think really helped make it an even stronger experience for people too. And what was the name of that card game again?
Can I help? I think
Can I help? Yeah, I love that. I actually didn't play many board games growing up, and you had another game in the lab around innovation and how to be innovative. And I was really skeptical when I first heard about it, and then I actually played it with other people, and it was phenomenal, the insights that it brought to people just playing the game in a very short period of time. I think we played for like 40 minutes, and it was able to teach people playing the different strategies that they could use to be even more innovative too. So I love the experience itself.
Yeah, we try to do different things. I mean, one of the business plan essentially for that lab was threefold: doing projects where you're actually working with government departments on policy questions or programmatic issues design, or even regulatory and legislative design. Then the second part was basically to really open the lab up to the public. So that which was very different approach, was like bring people from the inside in and from the inside out. And that idea, this fluidity of having experts in communication or design. We did one thing I was really proud of. I had mentioned this to you, Neil, that we had actually sourced out an academic, a PhD student in Queensland, Australia, who ended up using our lab as one of her case studies in her PhD thesis. And so she was looking at performance measurement of design, and that was really important because often in these kinds of situations, measuring performance of how design thinking and human-centered design applications work is really critical. And because the lab was so nascent at that period, we didn't have measures. And so part of Joanne Langham's work, Dr. Joanne Langham's work, was to actually try and figure that out by applying a methodology. So that was really important. And the third part of our business plan was basically networking and building up a cadre of people who were sponsors, supporters, challengers of human-centered design in a public sector context. And in doing so, that was the ability to create a community, essentially, of people to help augment, expand, and be part of the group that actually took this to the masses, right? Because being stuck in a beautiful, mind you, lab in downtown Ottawa was great, but not everybody gets to live in Ottawa and breathe in Ottawa and gets to that physical space. So yeah,
absolutely. And we talked a lot about public sector examples and humanitarian examples. This applies in the private sector quite a bit, and to businesses that are looking to create impact internally with their employees, like with the health game, as well as with their customers too. And so it's for any type of an organization that's looking to bring in more creativity, collaboration, creating safe spaces in a fast way that's going to create tangible, impactful results. Maybe can you talk a little bit more about how people need to experience design thinking and games to realize the value?
Yeah, often, in my experience, oftentimes people are dragged into these environments, right?
Yeah.
Kicking and screaming, not happy to be there because they're either being told they have to show up, or it's perceived as another consultation. And nothing's going to come out of it. So I think one of the challenges at the front end, as a designer, is someone coming in to do this problem solving experience, sort of in creating a custom. And essentially, it has to be custom experience. Otherwise, it doesn't work. I mean, cookie cutter stuff, methodologies and stuff don't work. You need to really understand who you're working with and what get under their skin and understand what their main pain points are before you even go into designing this. So you're always most of the time you're going to a room that you're not wanted in a sense. And once you figure out, okay, that's the reality, maybe one person is on your side, and that's the person that's hired you, then you have to figure out a way to actually make it fun. And fun for everyone isn't the same thing, but if you can get at least 50% of the room enjoying themselves within the first 15 minutes and laughing, then pretty much guaranteed the rest of the room will follow in short order. So it's that kind of stuff. So for example, with LSP, one of the things I do is I find very culturally specific icebreakers that drive people crazy, and intellectually crazy, and also just like figuratively crazy because they don't know how to deal with how to build what I'm asking them to. So in the case of the University of Ottawa, when we did a huge, it was a almost 200-person session with using a Lego Sears play to start the conversation about their strategic plan for 2030. I had everyone build a Gigi. Right.
Those that don't know Gigi.
Exactly. A Gigi is the horse that's winning the race. Okay. And that's the logo mascot for University of Ottawa. Most people who go to University of Ottawa don't know that. And so I was thinking that, okay, they will not know that. And that's going to throw them for a loop, including the professors and the administrators and staff members. And it really did. And it was really fun because then I had to put a visual logo of the logo on the screens that were in the room. But I did that on purpose because it started people thinking, well, first of all, what's a GG and how am I going to build a GG with Lego bricks? And then how's it going to look? And I had a bunch of constraints around how to do that. So getting them through that first step is typically the way to kind of start hooking them in. And I think that's the case with anything, especially if you're using games and non-traditional kinds of tools to problem solve.
Yeah, I love that. And you're right. A lot of the time, even with the design thinking too, we're going into rooms that there are so many skeptical people. And so you have to design for that specific group and in a way that allows them to open up and experience it in a positive way rather quickly so that they are feeling safe and also creative to be able to move forward. For some of the leaders that are listening in, how can leaders support design thinking and play in their teams and in their organizations?
Well, the first thing is I think you need to understand what it is. So having a good sense of what human-centered design actually is and looks like and feels like. And then having trust in that belief that this philosophy, this method, this approach can actually be useful and helpful and generate value, not just value from the investment perspective in a corporation, let's just say, but value for consumers that you would be selling to in the case of a company, value for employees, value for your the people in the room, including suppliers, etc. So that having that trust that the process will work is fundamental. And then the third thing is protecting the people who are doing it. So the people who are actually going to try and do this, if you're hiring a consulting team, if you're building an in-house lab in an organization, if you're spearheading a strategic planning process or what have you, and you're going to use this, you're going to support the use of this methodology and this approach, then let it flow. Give them the chance, give the people who are the specialists, the experts, the chance to actually do it. And generally speaking, I believe they won't fail. It may not come out the way you preconceive it to be, and that's actually probably very good. But they won't fail. And I think that's what leaders typically are most scared about is failure and what's the cost of failure. Yeah. And how does failure look on me and how do I wear failure, as opposed to how can we solve this situation, this problem in a way that's meaningful for the ultimate consumer or the Canadian citizen or whomever that human at the end of this problem is dealing with. Does that make sense?
That's such a great point. Yeah, and we've experienced it quite a bit too. Is part of that skepticism and that fear of failure. And every time the insights that people have gotten and the ideas that they've come up with are unbelievable. I think one of the clients we had a while ago, a number of years ago, that was very skeptical at the start. They decided to go all in, and it was a 2-day session. And afterwards, they were just like, "This is the greatest thing in the whole world," because of all the fears that they had to let go of and really spend the time and listen to their end users and understand the problem better, understand their end users better through the whole process to come up with ideas that they wouldn't have thought of because they didn't have as deep of a perspective of their end users' challenges. And so, yeah, it's overcoming that fear that some leaders might have of failure and of allowing for input. We just have a few more minutes, but I want to ask also, what advice would you give to someone who's new to series play and wants to start using it in their organization?
Just do it. I mean, I think the most important thing for me in this context is getting trained properly. Because especially in the last few years, what I've noticed when I use LSP, and there's issues of trauma inherent in the culture and in the complexity of the problem and the people that are inherently in the room. It's really important to understand how to use the tool properly And so getting trained is really important, I think, and then just do it. So LSP, I would say LSP can be used in areas where there is not an easy answer, or there's not a preconceived answer. That's where LSP is the best. And I think, you know, where it's pro forma, sort of like, you know, you have to do a report tomorrow and the report has to look like this. That's not where you use LSP typically. You use it for really hardcore issues, like how do you make highways, 16 safer for Indigenous groups and all Canadians traveling it? How do you, how do you reimagine the university for 2030 in an environment that doesn't want to really reimagine itself? So how do you solve for climate change, right? How do you, all of these things are really complex, difficult, challenging, multifaceted issues. And for me, human-centered design with a really robust toolkit can actually be extremely beneficial to an organization that wants to tackle sort of potential solutions to these kinds of big questions. I'm surprised, frankly, that political leaders and political parties don't actually use this more. Frankly, I would think for like building a party platform for whether it's a local, national, federal election, that would be an interesting test case. I haven't done that yet, but that would be a lot of fun to do. Actually.
That would be a lot of fun, yeah. And we do get called in a lot for reimagining organizations, projects, fundraising for some of our nonprofit clients as well too, because things shift quite a bit and they feel like they need to change things around. And so how do you reimagine things? And this is a perfect way of doing it. I'm going to open it up to Q&A because we don't have very much time left. And so if you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the Q&A, and we can start out with some that have already been asked. And so we have a question here on what makes a good question for LSP, because earlier in our conversation, you were talking about the fact that you need to start out with a really good question at the beginning. And so what are some things that make a good question?
Let me answer it this way. You need to understand the environment that you're walking into. So the clients and the client environment before you even start looking at what the question would be. That involves a lot of research and a lot of listening and chatting with people who think they know what they know, but they really actually don't know. And then coming back with the way we used to do it is with a small core team and start putting stuff on a whiteboard or start testing out questions. I think the more simplistic the question, where you actually have to understand which each single word means in the question and that it hangs together, is the key. You can have a very long question and it's convoluted and it's not. Having something very simple, but that we understand as the designers and the client understands going into the session, that this is the intentionality of the question. And this is how we're going to do this. And this is how because there's sequencing involved as well. So this is the start of it. And I think it even goes back to the icebreaker as well. Sequencing what the icebreaker can do to actually tee you up for the right question, the first question in LSP, is really critically important. So simple, but you got to know, to get to simple, you got to go through a lot of hoops and a lot of research and a lot of sort of, hitting your head against a wall, basically trying to think of, well, this really, really makes sense. And are we going to get the outcomes that we need on the basis of what we're asking? So language matters.
Totally, yeah. I know you and I have spent a lot of time framing questions in the lab, and just even the placement of one small word, the, or an S at the end of a word shifts the context of how people understand the question and interpret the question. And so, yeah, a lot of time thinking and banging heads against the wall. But that time is so well spent that when you get a group of people into the room, then it's very clear for them, and they have a real sound jumping board for the whole day or the whole experience. And I say day, but it doesn't have to be a day, just even a couple hours as well too. Yeah, so
just to piggyback on that, you can actually use LSP to build a question out, and that's what I'm starting to do. And the target market for me is those groups and organizations that are trying to find out how to use AI and ask the right question to get the right AI response. So LSP and it can be used in that context as well. So the question is really the kicker for everything. If it's not right, you get garbage out, right? Whether it's using AI, use software, or human-centered design, what have you.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why, for deeper clarity, that's the first step that we start with, is like, what is the question you're trying to solve? Because it helps the whole framing so that people can focus in on what's actually really important. We have a couple more questions here. One was on where we can get training on LSP, and we had a comment in there with a link to some courses coming through Serious Play happening in September. There's a question for the project with Indigenous on economic program evaluation. How did you integrate LSP with Google Jamboard technology?
Oh, so it was weird because it was during COVID, right? So everybody was on Zoom. And so that was a challenge. How do you integrate LSP, a tactile game, in a digital environment?
Yeah.
So part of it was making sure that people on the Zoom calls had a little bit of Lego, right? And then again, it's the same kind of process. You're asking a question, you're asking them to build, so they're building with what they have. You might have to modify it, obviously, and then you have to actually let loose with some of the rules around the methodology, because for them, what they would do is they would build a model, take a photograph of it, put it up onto Jamboard, and everybody would see it. So you're adding 2 or 3 more steps to the actual flow process of LSP, which is not ideal, but to compensate for the fact it was during COVID and online, that's kind of the way we ended up doing it. Like I said, it's not my preference, but in a pinch, it worked okay.
I love that. Yeah. And I know it wasn't one of the questions that I posed earlier, but you and I had chatted a little bit too. We're talking about design thinking, we're talking about serious play, but as we're chatting, it's also coming to mind our conversation from the past, where you actually don't have to stick with one particular methodology. You had a really great term for it, and I can't remember what you called it.
It was called fusion.
Sorry, what was it called?
Fusion.
Fusion, yeah. Yeah.
So I've been working with an Australian team and an American team in the last year or so, and they're actually writing a book based on 2 methodologies, one called Strategic Doing by Ed Morrison, an American academic and consultant, and another methodology, and they're kind of like trying to figure out a way to fuse them together. Yeah. And my first call with them last year, I was looking toward the Ukraine project in November, so the call was in, I would say, June. And what I did was I took the strategic doing methodology and I basically shoved it into human-centered design process. And then I twisted it and I threw in Lego Serious Play. And I designed an experience for that. The Ukraine project was designed with this experience of merging these methodologies, and through Lego Serious Play, actually advancing them. So, for example, strategic doing, what I really love about that methodology is they talk about assets. And so how do you unlock human assets that you as an individual have that are professional, personal, etc. So I took that concept and I designed the Lego Serious Play builds to incorporate the asset model. So the question for LSP would be, build a model that reflects the assets you bring to the Canada-Ukraine business ecosystem personally. So again, going back to my model, they would build an individual model like this, not quite like this, but in that sense. And then each piece would represent an insight into their assets. So the preciousness, I guess is what I'm saying, of these methodologies are there to be broken in a smart way. And that's part of my experimentation, and including with technologies using different types of softwares. For example, I integrate documentary photography into my practice because that's part of what I do as well. So there are a whole bunch of different ways of creating that customized experience that actually can resonate for people and at the end. But the preciousness of sticking to one lane, whether it's strategic doing methodology, whether it's LSP methodology, I've gone beyond that, and I think that there's much richness, infusing some of these great pieces of these methodologies into something that's really dynamic.
Yeah, I love that. And with deeper clarity, we fuse multiple things together, the mindset component of it, design thinking, alignment, and strategic foresight as well too, to make sure that you're getting the impact that you want. It doesn't have to be one, it's multiple all together as well too. I know there's some questions that we still didn't get to in the Q&A,
Okay.
but if you're interested, feel free to reach out to Chrystia. I think LinkedIn's probably a good format for it too. If you have other questions as well, I know there were some questions also on the name of that innovation card game played at the Innovation Science and Economic Development Lab. If you remember it, Chrystia, maybe we can put it into the chat. With that, I also want to pass it over to Fernanda because she has some more comments for us. I know people were asking about training for series play, so there is a link. Thanks, Margie, for putting up that link in the chat. And if you are interested, we also have some design thinking or deeper clarity training coming up. I think our first one is September 11th. We have a one-day training as well as some additional ones that will pop into the link. But with that, Fernanda, maybe I'll pass it over to you if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you all very much for attending today. I hope you enjoyed this webinar and it was insightful. So as Neil mentioned, we encourage you to continue exploring design thinking with our LinkedIn network and also our one-day training, Design Thinking Level 1, coming up at the beginning of September. For those of you that may have joined later or wish to revisit any part of today's session, we'll be sending out a recording of the webinar along with some additional resources that were mentioned. So we'll try to get all those games names there and Chrystia contact as well, and all of our contacts information. And additionally, we would love to hear your feedback on today's webinar. So at the end, there will be a survey. And it would be really nice if you could share your input there. We have our next webinar on September 24, and Nilofer will go deep dive into the empathy phase of design thinking on that one. I can share again the links here too for you to register. And also for more information about deeper clarity or design thinking, don't forget to check our website, follow us on social media channels for updates or upcoming webinars and other events. We also always have some exciting topics lined up, and we would love to see you all again. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Chrystia. Really appreciate you coming on board and chatting with all of us. And thanks, Fernanda, Osa, and everybody that joined the call.
Thank you.
Have a great Tuesday.